and I like that phrase, sea of sameness. There's no sea of sameness here. It's all about really sort of thinking differently. I'm going to dive straight in because I really want to give as much airtime to my guests as possible because we have so much to learn from them. So, as Dom said, this is all about this idea of sort of brands must stretch out into new spaces. And brands must do that intentionally. And brands that do that actually double their chances of growth, according to our World Panel data. But where do they get their inspiration from? It's hard. Innovation's hard. Stretching into new spaces is hard. You need fresh inspiration. Now, last year, we brought you Helen Edwards and we had a look into the margins. This year, we want to bring you something different. We want to bring you some fresh inspiration from what we call change brands. Now, this is Chris's definition, which he's kindly written for us. Brands with a business model that are an improvement on the status quo in the terms of health, sustainability, or social impact. And he will explain more about that, but these are brands like Fussy, Wild, all those sorts of brands that are up there that you can see, who are doing things differently. So these brands think differently, but how can more brands think like this? How can we think more like change brands? Now, luckily, as Dom already said, Chris wrote the book on this. And so I am really, as fast as I can, handing over to him because he is not only the author of the book Obsolete, he also is the founder of Serious Tissues and also Change Please. So I'm going to hand over to him and so he can share all his insights. But as Dom said, we really wanted to bring it to life. So afterwards, I'm going to be joined by another couple of founders to really try to unpack it and make it very practical, how you might be able to do things differently. So first of all, welcome to the stage, Chris.
Thank you. So the question I'm going to try and answer today is, why is it that big brands with all their expertise and resources find it really hard to unlock innovation, whereas startups and founders are the ones that often come to the table with breakthroughs, with big things that seize the future of categories? It's fair to say, and it's probably an understatement to say, we're living through a decade of massive disruption in so many different ways. So in all sorts of different ways. So the sense of instability, division, polarization we're seeing in the political landscape, huge disruptive forces like HFSS regulation, AI, the rise of GLP-1 and Ozempic and drugs like that that are going to change how we eat. Sustainability, this constant push to be more sustainable. We're seeing attitude shifts, we're seeing behavior shifts. Perhaps more importantly, we're seeing wealth shifts as well, with that money transferring between generations. And we're also seeing the erosion of the built-in advantage of big brands. In the past, you may have been, there's few supermarkets, there's only a few media channels. Now you're buying through Amazon, D2C is there, e-commerce, discounters, so many things. That erosion of big brands that dominate the shelf space has been happening all the time. So to dig into this a little more and to understand a bit about what it's like inside a big organization, I spoke to my secret agent within big FMCG, a person in the book called Agent Change. And there's one particular quote I thought was a good way to start. So it's important to understand the world where these companies were created. It was the time of cheap energy, subsidized agriculture, and the creation of vast monocultures in the Midwest. The growth of the interstate highway system, with big trucks trucking along, supermarkets where companies could dominate the shelves, the rise of TV, but just a few channels, so you could dominate the airwaves with your brand. It was the most incredible environment for building huge brands within the US that could then go global through American culture and through the spread of the same way of operating the economy. And so that is the world big companies are optimized for. But if we fast forward to the present day, we see things are fundamentally different. Energy is not cheap anymore, monocultures are a catastrophe, plastic packaging was hailed as a miracle product, but it's now deeply unpopular and problematic. Supermarkets don't dominate like they used to, so there's loads of different ways to buy things. We have many different TV channels and media. So monopolizing them, as we did in the 70s and 80s, is impossible. Regulation's getting tougher, and consumers are getting more discerning. So the question all of us are grappling with is whether it is possible for a company that was built to thrive in one world to thrive in the next. And we don't have the answer yet. because it's not been done. Nobody's done it yet, or even got close. So it's an interesting framing of the challenge we're facing. And I think you can look at this disruption through two different lenses. You can see it as a threat, or you can see it as an opportunity. A threat to be managed, a risk to be mitigated against, something to be measured, or an opportunity to be grasped. An opportunity to win share, to outflank competitors, to attract a new audience, to premiumize a category and get people spending more, to launch new products, potentially to outposition someone who you're competing with, or a way to own the future of a category. There's so much opportunity in disruption. And I think this quote really sums it up with looking through those two lenses. The pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. The optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. And I think this is the fundamental difference between life inside a big, big company and life as a founder or in a startup. You are looking for opportunity. You are the optimist. Perhaps naively optimistic, thinking you can come in and take on the big boys, but you have that optimism and that naivety that I think can be really powerful. So I believe the best way to deal with the disruption that we're all facing at the moment in our categories is to think like a founder. And we're seeing a wave of brands really coming through in all sorts of different shapes and sizes and all sorts of categories that are jumping on this disruption. I talk about change brands in the book. Bain published a piece of research this week about insurgent brands that are building big shares of categories. They are brands that are pushing the status quo forward in health, sustainability, and and social impact, as Nicki said at the start. Since the book's come out, we've built a collective of over 100 brands that are trying to work together and partner and collaborate on this. So all sorts of different brands, and we've got Tony's and Suri here in the room today to talk about this in a little bit more detail. And even Michelle Obama's getting on board. She's been part of her own change brand, which is a healthier version of soft drinks in the US, called Plezzy. She hasn't replied to my email yet, but I'm hoping I'll get a reply soon. And these brands are not just doing good; they are growing rapidly. So brands, we all know about Wild and the journey they've been on, and the recent announcement of the potential acquisition by Unilever. Smol have been growing at a rapid rate. Brands like Trip coming in and really causing a stir. Liquid Death have come in and flown in the States. Be very interested to see that 2024 figure, particularly with that big trajectory in the US. And we know Tony's are, again, growing rapidly. One of, if not the fastest growing chocolate brand in the world, potentially a little bit behind Mr. Beast. But, he's got a few followers. And then I mentioned the insurgent brands that Bain talk about. It's really interesting. While they may only take a small part of that market share, so insurgent brands have around 2% market share, they are responsible for a huge chunk of that growth. So if you are looking for growth, thinking in this way is really disruptive and a big way of grasping it. So 2% of market share at a total category level, 30% of incremental growth. Within personal care, it's even higher. So 3% of market share, 45% of category growth. So much of that growth is coming from new disruptive insurgent brands. Working with Kantar, we looked at the data for a whole cohort of change brands and really wanted to understand what it is that makes them different. And leaning into what Dom talked about at the start, being meaningfully different. Change brands are absolutely that. They're almost twice as differentiated as the average brand in a category. Huge score there in terms of difference. They're 16% more likely to grow in the next 12 months. They're 10% more likely to command a higher price premium, so that opportunity for premiumization that's so important in so many of the commoditized categories we're operating in. And they're 24% more likely to gain importance in the future. So that future trajectory, the opportunity to own the future of a category, is really, really key. So just to kind of dig into this a little bit more detail, I'm going to talk about two things that I think are really key in terms of how to think like a founder. And you can bring this mindset into your organization, big or small. Two things. So firstly, the opportunity to embrace first principles. And secondly, designing for difference. So if we dive into this first one, we have this sat in front of us. Right? When you're looking at a category, coming at it from the outside, you have the power of the blank page. You're looking at something, you haven't got the legacy systems or the challenges you've had in the past. You're looking at something completely from scratch. So where is that opportunity? And if you're launching a brand in 2025 versus 1980s, or even a lot longer back for a lot of you guys who would have operating with brands that have potentially been around for hundreds of years, or at least 100 years, the opportunity to have that blank page is really key. With change brands, I think there's 3 elements that really make them stand out in this world that we're living in today. So firstly, they find a problem people really care about, gives it the salience, gives it that standout, makes people lean in straight away. Find a problem people care about. Secondly, find a category problem. So we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, but in most categories there is something that is slightly problematic or not quite perfect. Right? Everything's always looking to be improved. So there is always an opportunity to find a category problem. And then finally, making a proven impact with your business model, with what you're doing. So the combination of these 3 are hugely powerful. The reason it's a multiplication sign rather than a plus is if any of these are 0, it's way less powerful than if you have all 3 in that potent mix. And Tony's and Suri have both got brilliant examples of this in terms of how the brand has created something really powerful. I'm going to talk briefly through the journey I went on with Serious Tissues. So here's my kids. So I think firstly thinking about what is a problem people care about. Myself and the other 3 founders of Serious Tissues, between us we've got, at the time of launch, we had 8 children. Now we have 9. Little Patsy, who's come along recently. So we were increasingly concerned about what the world's going to look like in 20 years' time. Right? When our children reach adulthood, what is that world going to look like in terms of climate change, in terms of deforestation? So we wanted to take that on. We then looked and thought, okay, what is a category which is contributing to this, which is part of the problem? And we found toilet paper, hiding in plain sight. 1 million trees are cut down every day just to wipe our bums. In a world where we need trees doing their job and capturing carbon more than ever. So quite a staggering problem. The majority of toilet paper is made from virgin pulp, which is a tree grown for 20, 30 years and then cut down. The difference we make is, so I suppose, hopefully that'll move, the world has serious issues, so we created Serious Tissues. Took us ages to add that one letter. But it was the first premium branded recycled product. So there's a lot of bamboo brands out there. There's not a lot operating in recycled. So that means UK made, 100% recycled, the paper you use in your home and offices, UK made and plastic free. So something that was solving that category problem and presenting a solution. And we also plant trees with every sale. So since launch, we planted over 1.5 million trees all around the world and in the UK. There's one of the projects we've contributed to with our tree planting. Just by changing your toilet roll, you can plant a huge amount of trees. And we've got this amazing tree planting dashboard that allows you to dig in and see where those trees are planted. So you've got that real impact. And I think what's really key about it is, this is the quote that inspired the book, right? The business model is the difference. So what I'm not saying with the book is we need to make big companies obsolete, big brands obsolete. It is about the business models and problematic business models that we need to tackle. So this quote I love: you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that's what I think stands these brands apart, because they've got that blank sheet of paper, they can embrace first principles, they can create a brand fit for 2025, they can therefore tackle those business models and stand out and be different. Moving on to the second part of this idea of designing to be different. So it's very interesting seeing that scroll from L'Oreal about all the category conventions within beauty. The opportunity coming in from scratch. You've got category conventions everywhere. You can get everything else every other brand is doing in the room, and you can create a brand that goes all the way over here, smashes those conventions, does something completely differently. And I think so many change brands do this amazingly well. I'm not going to talk about Liquid Death, but they are great at that. So Tony's Chocolonely, we're about to hear from Nicola, but this is a brand that is tackling a hugely serious problem in exploitation of children in the cocoa supply chain. You could be forgiven for creating a brand that felt very bleak and very, if UNICEF created it, it would be very sad pictures of kids holding machetes in fields or something like that. This is a joyful brand, hugely salient in terms of the color it brings to the table, everything in terms of the mission, the way the inequality within chocolate's communicated by the unequal chunks of the chocolate bar, the fun they have with the advent calendar, taking one of the chocolates out of the, I think it was the 8th, and then on the 9th there's 2 in there. bit of a teachable moment. I'm sure there's a lot of tears in various rooms. But the difference that Tony's generate with this in terms of the Kantar number is, I'm probably in the way of that, but a difference index of 226. Similarly, you look at Wild. Again, something that's come in, looked at the deodorant category and created something that's hugely differentiated, very slick looking, a brand for the Instagram generation. A hugely powerful difference index, and there's a reason the conversations that have been happening recently with Unilever have been happening, because they are standing out, they're growing quickly, and they have a brand that is a powerful thing. Moving on to Surrey. So again, I won't steal Geeve's thunder too much, because he's about to come up and talk about it. But the toothbrush category, dominated by two big players, Surrey have come in as a startup, absolutely flown. And what they've created is something I think is an absolute thing of beauty. It's made a toothbrush aspirational. It's something that, great bit of photography, brilliant bit of product design, and a category that you think would have been quite commoditized actually becomes really aspirational. They've also really focused on the key things in each category. Do you need Bluetooth on a toothbrush, or do you need a 30-day battery life? Really interesting in terms of the way they've brought that together. So this sense of bringing status, right, making positive change aspirational rather than just something you should buy for the sake of it, right? The brands you buy say a lot about you as an individual. And something as simple as baked beans. You can come in and you can apply this same sort of thinking. So Bold Bean Company have come in and they've premiumized the bean category, got to 5 million in sales in a couple of years, really flown, started off with all sorts of different beans and pulses, and the benefits of eating beans and pulses as a more sustainable source of protein is huge, but they've made it aspirational, right? They talk about being bean obsessed, they talk about the leguminate, really interesting language, really making it feel fun, right? A brand you want to be a part of. I was convinced I was going to say that wrong. And even brands like Small coming in, disrupting a category. These guys came out of Unilever, they created something really powerful, really made for D2C. So the opportunity to come in and look for opportunity to disrupt, design for difference, create something that just feels totally different from the category, and smash those conventions is a really interesting way to approach it. But you don't need to be a startup to think like this. And there's a really interesting example I talk about a little bit in the book. So this brand here, building on the success of Small, is a brand called EC30, stands for Enlightened Clean. It removes the water from the cleaning category. I think there's a crazy stat that 95% of what you have in your cleaning spray, for instance, is tap water, right? What's the point of shipping that around the world when you can use something like that? But actually, this is a brand that was brought to you by Procter & Gamble, people who are responsible for shipping a huge amount of that water around the land. But by being totally separate from P&G and creating something that was able to do deliver those messages that change brands could, they were able to stand out. They were able to build a brand in terms of traction and sales and all of those kind of things. And more recently, they've actually rolled this innovation of the waterless cleaning into the Tide brand. So they've got these patches into Tide. So you're getting the combination of a change brand and a power brand brought together with that innovation. They've proven it. They've disrupted themselves from within, and now they're applying the power of a huge, huge brand like Tide to bring it to the mass market. So one final thought to leave you with the conversation we've been having about growth. If you want to find growth, I believe the best way to do that is to think like a founder. And handily, we've worked with Kantar to develop a tool that allows you to do that. So the combination of founder-led thinking and Kantar's data. So if you are dealing with disruption, it's time to think like a founder. There's 3 different elements to this. Firstly, we talk about mindset. So how do you think like a founder? And there's more than just those 2 principles in there. There's a lot more that we unpack. There's then the opportunity to work with the Kantar data, to look at your categories and those that are adjacent, and try and find opportunities to potentially disrupt a competitor, to own the future of a category, all of these things. And then the final session is really getting together and developing prototypes. So an opportunity to, what could we do? How might this come to life? How could we do this? So the combination of founder-led thinking and Kantar's brilliant data. Look, 1 second left, perfect. And now I think Nicki and Geeve and Nicola are coming up.